Welcome back to the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny. Here, we have a very special guest today. Somebody who hasn't been on the podcast, I think, in maybe 3 years. Dan Orlovsky, when was the last time you were on the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny?
Oh my goodness. It had to be 3 years sounds like a long time, but when my brain is thinking
Maybe.
it was somewhat early after us starting. I don't know. We've been together working for 5 years now. So I would say 3 years is a good number.
Okay, well, I feel like I have 3 years worth of takes to now sort of bounce off you. Well, oh no. So I should be clear. Today we're not doing a power rankings. I started the power rankings pods on Monday. We had Ryan Clark, our other teammate, last week. I will be getting back to that next week. But this week we're doing a very special podcast that I've been wanting to do with you in particular. And that is talking about sort of NFL offense, like where it's come in the last few years, where we think it's going. We do these roundtables NFL Live where we talk about big trends, and I've been gathering data all off season, trying to kind of come up with ideas for the next one. So yeah, I'm really excited to discuss this with you, part because as I look back on our roundtables, like, I don't want to say we nailed it, but the one that really jumps out is 3 years ago. So it was in 2022 that we did our roundtable on how running the football was back, which sounds really obvious, but it kind of didn't feel that obvious at the time. Dan, do you remember why we did that? Like, what was it that sort of led? Because I believe that was your idea.
Yeah.
Statistically, that has been really borne out since then. I'm going to get into the numbers, but what was it that was it any particular team, or what made you want to talk about that back then?
No, I remember vividly, and it was probably, I don't know the exact date, but I'm going to call it 6 weeks into the season or something. And, everyone always makes fun when I say, I watch every snap. And so, it just felt like something week by week that I was like, man, it just looks like teams are putting quarterbacks under the center more and running the football more. And I sent a text or an idea to Mark Eisman, our producer. And I was like, Mark, I think this is something. Just, I could be dead wrong. Can you have research look at if numbers say it? Or maybe it was you I texted, what do the numbers say? And, we've talked about how we all kind of love when numbers match tape and tape match numbers. And so it was just something that started to look on tape when I was like, man, that quarterback's under center way more than I used to see him under center. And so, yeah, that was, a massive, massive benchmark for the show. And, we've had some since then of 4x1 and, things like that. So I love getting ahead of things like that.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the trends I've noticed statistically in formations and personnel groupings and all that. But I want to start with running the football because that has continued since then. When I'm looking at are teams actually doing this? Are they running the ball more? Are they better at running the ball? You have to really parse out the data because you can't just look at run rates because it's so situational in football, right? Like if you're looking at how often does a team run on, are they ahead? Are they really good? Are there, teams that have,
right.
So what I really like, Next Gen Stats has this stat called run probability over expected, which is basically, how often does an average team run the football in this set down and distance game situation? And are NFL teams exceeding that? So it's really accounting for situational football. And according to that metric, Dan, in 2024, NFL teams ran the ball over expected at the highest rate since Next Gen Stats started tracking. So in 8 years, that's taking into account also score, time, all of that. So starting there, this has continued. This has not stopped. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, I always talk about DVOA, which is the efficiency metric that accounts for opponent. So the four best teams last year, the four best offenses, you can probably guess. Well, actually, one of them is a little surprising, maybe. But what would you say?
The four best offenses in regards to this?
Just generally. 2024.
Okay, I'm going to say Baltimore.
Yeah.
Buffalo?
Yep.
Philadelphia?
No, they really struggled in the first half of the season.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. That's why I was so critical. So Baltimore, Buffalo. I'm going to throw a flyer out there and say the Cardinals.
No, they were actually surprisingly high, but it's Detroit and Green Bay.
Detroit and Green Bay. Detroit should have been there. Yeah.
So those are the four best offenses. Totally, counting, passing, all of it. They were also the four best rushing teams.
Totally.
I want you to compare that to just 2020. The top four
Mhm.
offenses, this was when Brady was still playing, of course, were the Packers with Rodgers that year, the Chiefs, the Bucks, the Bills. Of those four teams, only one was inside the top 10 in running. So I
Mhm.
want to pose that to you and ask, do you feel like now, like, you have to be good at running the football to be a top offense in the NFL?
Totally. And I think like one of the wild things or like the most like fascinating things kind of around this whole conversation is how quickly it changed. Like
Yeah.
how fast the NFL offense wise changed. When Patrick first started as the starter, and that's what, like 6 years ago, maybe like
2018. 18 was his
okay,
first year
18.
when he like tore up the league.
Yeah,
Right.
55 touchdowns and all that. It was a spread it out, throw it all over the map, RPO you to death type of thing. And that's how offensive football was played. It was almost like, these teams offensively wanted to spread you out like college does, almost sideline to sideline to create ridiculous amounts of space inside and just kill the inside of that space. And it was like you have to play offensive football in that time to be successful. Part of it was because defenses started to get so light and athletic at the defensive line, mainly interior, light and athletic at the linebackers. So these
Yeah.
freak athletes were playing linebackers. So like you had to get those guys out in space more. You couldn't play them in phone booths really. And it's a totally different league right now. It is a league that is from candidly the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, when it is about being capable and willing to run the football. It is about ball possession. It is about snaps. It is about time of possession. It is about efficiency in your offense. And that are really old school kind of parallels or parables of football.
What I find also really interesting is, so you talked about a big part of the reason why this happened. And I think this is back in 2022 when we first had the conversation. We talked a lot about defensive structure, the type of players who were playing defense, the lighter
Yep.
bodies, the emphasis on speed, but then also structurally, this was also the beginning of the too high conversation in response to Mahomes. So that has not stopped. NGS tracks this too high shells still at the highest rate in 8 years last year, single high at the lowest rate, light boxes still at an extremely high rate. One thing I found interesting is offenses are running into too high at the highest rate also in
Sure.
8 years. They're saying,
Yeah.
hey, if you're going to play us this way. So my question for you is like, at what point do you think defense starts to change? Another thing I noticed in the stats was safety depth is down. So you're getting light
Totally.
boxes, but safeties are coming in a little bit. Do you think that's a response to the run thing or what?
1,000%. So I think the butterfly effect of all this was going back to that time of like 18, 19, 20, and all that. It was spread out, throw it all over the place, all those RPOs. The counter, and this really started almost when the Eagles won the Super Bowl against New England with Nick Foles. They just ran RPO every play. And so then the counter to this defensive stuff was, well, we can't play zone that much because the RPO was built to kill zone. We got to play more man. And then man started to get ate up by athletic quarterbacks. So then it's like, well, we're not going to play a ton of like traditional zone. We can't play man that much anymore. We're going to play these shell defenses and maybe match stuff when it comes to, the coverage. And it's interesting to see, like, when I first came into the league, our RPOs, our check with me's were often one high or two high defenses. A quarterback would get to the line of scrimmage. We would have two play calls in our huddle, in our headset. And if there were two safeties, we would more than likely run the football. If there was one safety, we would more than likely throw the football. That's kind of what's happening. I think the evolution of it is this, Mina. So like the defenses got lighter and more athletic. The answer now, and we will see it. I don't know if we're starting to see it totally yet, but we will start to see it is teams will start, and I feel like I've felt this way for up a couple of years. They're going to start going back to bigger defensive tackles. Like the defensive tackle that can
Mm.
hold up a double team is going to be, again, a mandate. I think the linebackers will get bigger. We're starting to see that a little bit in the NFL. The need for them to be like those run stopping linebackers, I think will get back. I honestly think the two things, and I would love to get like an RC's perspective of it, is like corners that are willing to tackle again. Like a couple years ago, it was like find cats that can cover. And now it's like you have to be capable of tackling at the cornerback position.
Put a pin in that when we get to formations, because I've
Yeah.
been thinking about that a
I have
lot
the
as well.
note
But
literally right there for it. Yeah.
yeah, right. When we get to condensed formations. But I think you're right. I think like for defenses right now, they're still making the calculus that stopping the pass is still more important, right? And because even success rate for passing is down, it's still higher than running. Those lines haven't crossed yet. And defenses are happy still to take away explosives,
Totally.
sometimes at the expense of getting run on. But when you look at the top four offenses in the league and you consider, okay, yeah, but you're going to have to stop the run game of a Buffalo, a Baltimore, a Philadelphia, Detroit. You do that risk reward and you decide, okay, well, the risk of explosives is more important to us. You do risk not getting the football. So it might be more about personnel, to your point, than it is about changing the structure of the defenses.
Yeah. And I also think like you'll see more and more. We started to see it last year where there's so many different things that defenses now have to do with their fronts or their
Yeah.
stunts or how they try to get numbers to help in the run game to also protect against some of the pass game stuff. I also think, and this again was a thing years and years and years ago, we'll start to see it as teams defensively, identity wise, will completely change in the red zone in different parts of the red zone.
Mm.
Like the old adage of give up the yards, not the points. There is the reality of like, okay, we're just the whole thing was, Coach Belichick was notorious and famous for like trying to outgrind offenses and quarterbacks. So, giving them, some yardage 20 to 20, thinking one, you'll make the mistake at some point, two, you'll get a penalty to set you back, or three, that they'll buckle down and force field goal attempts. And so like you would play against those really good defenses. This was Baltimore, this was Pittsburgh, this was New England, and you would get into the red zone and you'd be like, I have no clue what this defense that you're in is right now. You haven't shown it all game. You haven't shown it on tape. So
Yeah.
I think you'll see even more growth of that in the league.
I wanted to bring up another trend, in addition to teams running the football more, running the ball well. So I was looking at all the different personnel groupings to see what's up, what's down. So it's funny, we did a thing on 21 personnel, but that actually went down a little bit. I think that really has to do with teams like San Francisco losing McCaffrey, the Dolphins, teams that had sort of skewed that. But the one grouping that was up and up at historic rates was 12, two tight ends. 12 personnel in 2024, teams used it at the highest rate since True Media started tracking, which was 2007. So increasingly over 20% now, with some teams really stretching that. We are just coming off the heels of the Steelers trading for Johnny Smith, by the way. That could be more like 13 personnel with them. But do you feel that the use of more and more 12 personnel is for kind of similar reasons, frankly, to what you're talking about with teams running the football?
100%. I think it's attached to wanting to run the football more and having bigger bodies on the field. I also think because it was trending to becoming such a matchup league, it's really, if we're being honest, the only position offensively that I could put on the field that dictates to the defense what you put on the field. That's somewhat abnormal. Like, yes, if I put 7 offensive linemen on the field, that certainly, but that I can run 90+% of my base offense scheme wise from that personnel, that's the only position that I could dictate to you as a defense. And when it comes to, okay, we as an offense, we want to be able to do both things, right? Run it and throw it. We have 2 good tight ends that both are 50-50, maybe 60-40 with their ability to run, block, pass protective needed, and be a viable pass catch option. When it comes to the studying of defenses, if we as an offense look at you and go, well, like Baltimore's the perfect example, and we've talked about this.
Yeah.
If you are a team playing the Ravens and they put Mark Andrews and Likely on the field, you're in a really difficult spot if you don't have pretty high-end personnel, because both of them are capable run blockers. and both of them are
Yeah.
capable pass catching threats. And so the reality is, and this it's simple, it's just very difficult, is who do you put on the field? And then how does the down and distance affect who do you put on the field? And so, yeah, I totally think that it's about wanting to run the football and wanting to control to the defense who they can put on the field. Because I want you, like offensively, MK, like I want who I want on the field for you as a defense. Like I want to create those matchups and take advantage of them.
Yeah, I feel like you said competent run blocker, or you just like good enough. I think that's such
Yeah,
an important piece of this with your tight ends. There are, I think a blocking tight end right now is maybe the most undervalued thing in football. I was
100%.
watching the Commanders this offseason, and I was watching this dude, John Bates, who I don't know if we've ever said the name John Bates on NFL Live,
Very good
but
blocker.
he blocks his off.
Yep.
In Minnesota, you have examples as well. Munn, Oliver, like a lot of these good offenses do have a guy who can block. But to your point with Baltimore, Andrews is fine, right? Likely is a glorified receiver, really. But well, that's not true. He competes. But my point is, you just defenses are almost overwhelmingly going to play you light with 12 at most of
Exactly.
these teams. If you just have a guy who can block at an average level, you're just really compromising them. And I don't think defenses have really. I'm trying to think of like a defense who has figured out you need like a big nickel, like a Kyle Hamilton type.
You need an awesome nickel, three safeties type of thing. That's the thing is like how many defenses have the ability to play both and feel that it's 50-50 to play both the run and the pass when those teams are putting that 12%. And then the trickle down effect. And again, we talked about it, and I don't want to get the trickle down effect was like some of the 4x1 stuff. Like these teams would get into 12 and they would then get into a 4x1 formation. And then again, we would talk about it on NFL Live is like all of a sudden I'm running the football at a 190-pound nickel and I have a 320-pound offensive lineman blocking them. That's what Minnesota does a ton. So that's what Green Bay, like that advantage us as an offense. And so I just think it's the teams are, really offensively trying to take advantage of how much of a premium has been put on speed and athleticism in space.
There's two teams I want to bring up to you as we wrap 12 personnel. Two teams. One is Cincinnati. This was a quiet evolution of the Bengals that never used anything but 11 the first few years of Joe Burrow's career. And you bring in Mike Gesicki, but then you also have Drew Sample, who's their blocker, Eric All, who played before getting hurt. And not only were they good in 12 personnel, Dan, they were actually good at running the football out of it, which otherwise is not a good rushing team. They found something there. So put a pin in that. The other team I want to ask you about is Buffalo. I keep waiting for it with Buffalo because it feels like, okay, this Bills offense now, we don't have speed at wide receiver. We have a dominant run game. Obviously, a quarterback is a mutant. Feel like we keep waiting for them to have that sort of heavy personnel diversity. Obviously, they do the 6 offensive line stuff. And it just, don't you feel like if they could do that the way some of these other offenses are, it could take that offense to a different level in terms of compromising defenses?
100%. I think it's a little bit on both those guys have to stay healthy at the same time, both Kincaid and Knox. And I think if we're being honest, Kincaid probably has to take a decent step forward. Like there's an expectation level that he's got to become. Knox is proven to be a good player. So yeah, I would love Buffalo to do it. I don't know, Kincaid's got to take a step and he's got to stay healthy enough to get capable of it. But I also appreciate them going, he's not there yet. We will go with the 6th offensive lineman thing was kind of 12 in a way. It kind of was. It was an obvious thing, like a heavy 12, I guess, a big 12 because it was such a blocking emphasis rather than a pass catching emphasis. But I totally agree that it would diversify it in a way that would be less predictable.
What do you think about Cincinnati doing it a little bit more?
Well, I remember early on last season complaining about Cincinnati so much because I was like, this offense is dead. You can't run this 11 personnel shotgun RPO offense anymore, because that's kind of what they were doing. And I give them credit that they started to do it more. The 12 personnel, it allowed them to put Joe under center a little bit. It allowed them to run the football a little bit, to your point. There was a reality that they were just catch and throw offense so much. And there was the stress on their offensive line. So I think of it this way, like MK, I was thinking, and we're going to get into a little bit with the formation stuff. If you're not, as an offense in the league, there's 32 teams. If you don't have some remnants of the Shanahan world, and again, we're going to get into it, I really believe you're playing catch up. And unless you've got some different stuff at quarterback, but I
Right.
really believe you're playing behind at quarterback that's going to lead to some struggle.
If you're not creating run pass conflict, really, in
Exactly.
some way.
Like if you're not, it's not about PO and catch and throw and take advantage of the space in the middle of the field anymore. It's not. It is run past conflict, try to create explosive plays in usage of that, and then take advantage of the space on the perimeter, not on the inside.
Right. And that, of course, brings us to formations, which we can just talk about now. Yeah. So, I mean, you and I have talked for a couple years now about how formations are getting more and more condensed. And this is obviously a Shanahan trend that's been going on for a while. But this data is really something. So offenses used condensed formations at the highest rate ever in the next gen tracking era last year. It's consistently gone down, down, down. They also measure the average formation width, and it was the lowest it's ever been. So, and spread offenses are the lowest ever. So it's very obvious this is a Shanahan league, and we've seen that tree proliferate around the NFL. But rather than just, say, okay, coaches are why it's happening, I want to talk to you about, like, from a football perspective, why
Yeah.
this is happening. What does it do to defenses that makes life
Yeah.
so difficult for them?
So I think first of all, I think it's important to point out when we say, like shrunk down or spread out or condensed, like spread out was kind of what we were referencing before, just for your listeners, like
Yeah.
almost sideline to sideline. They're 53 and a third width, sideline to sideline. So just trying to spread that out and create that space by forcing the defense to spread out. It's gone to the opposite. When you say condensed formation, is you're trying to almost shrink everybody down closer to the football. So one, why are football teams offensively doing that more? I think number one, I counted this morning, I think there's 20 out of the 32 teams that have some attachment to Shanahan and McVay or run stuff that comes from their world. So you're talking about 2/3 of the league essentially. So, and that's the premise of their system, is shrinking you down and then creating visual chaos. So one, just teams attaching themselves to it more. Number two, when the league years ago went to like so many RPOs, again, the defenses would counter with man coverage. So it wouldn't have to be in that conflict of the RPO, or match coverage. Well, the way that the offenses would counter that would be running all these different kinds of stack formations to run crossers and pick plays and getting guys running away from defenders. So as an offense, you're sitting there going, well, if you're going to play those types of coverages, we want to then get our guys running away from you to take advantage in the pass game. Then the next evolution of that is, well, if that's what you're going to do defensively and you're just going to commit to coverage, we're going to force those people that are closer to the football to tackle. And so that's why you see so many teams getting into these formations, in part because we want those people that you have brought into your organization to just cover, to have to tackle all game. And then I then go get receivers that are willing and capable blockers as well. So that's why you see Detroit. That's why you see San Fran. That's why you see Green Bay. That's part of the identity of that.
I love the point you're making about how it basically forces a certain physicality on defensive backs, both tackling in the run game and also in the pass game, because you're creating so much traffic over the middle of the field. This is it's a Shanahan trend, but I was watching the Chargers. So I was specifically watching Lad McConkey this offseason. And the way Greg Roman, who's not, that's a different thing, was putting him in bunches close to the formation, creating all sorts of mess. And then he was just bullying dudes. And they were destroying man coverage with this, by the way. He was putting them on the inside out of these super, super, super tight formations. I was thinking, man, like, what a useful player to have right now. A slot who's quick enough to beat man coverage, but tough enough to just body guys and body
Yep.
other spots because of what you're describing, which is he's physical. He's a physical
Yep.
player.
Yeah, and I think that there's been such a growth in what you can do out of bunch concepts. Bunch was used to be like you'd get it in on third down, and nowadays there's such a growth in what you can do out of the bunch in the run and the pass. If you have those willing and capable perimeter blockers, you can get in the bunch and run very basic run concepts, like very basic run concepts that I don't want to sit there and tell everybody like you're guaranteed to get 4 yards, but you're almost guaranteed to create positive run plays. And so that gets back to that early commitment of the efficiency of your offense and trying to get into 2nd and 6. So like you can get into bunch, and this is again attached to the 12 personnel stuff. And now like I have 2 tight ends blocking, 1 defensive back, and we can run duo or whatnot, which is double teams. And then that allows me to get into pass game stuff that creates matchups or creates picks or natural rubs. It allows me to create, like from a pass game, when I have that bunch also, I'm almost securing a little bit of an edge for my pass protection as well, because I can get a
Yeah.
chip immediately or a help immediately. And so there's a lot that comes out of that stuff positive for an offense.
Bunch formations in 2024, the highest rate ever since Next Gen started tracking it.
And that's
16%.
all downs?
All downs. All downs.
Wow.
Across the league, all down. 16%, more than double what it was in 2016. It was just 9%. So this is something offense, but it's that combined with, of course, and we've been talking about this forever. Everybody knows about this motion also being,
Totally.
to your point, being at the highest. Motion is still going up. That trend has not abated. Both motion at the snap, before the snap. So you're seeing these two things happen at the same time. You know what offense I kind of can't wait to watch this year, which I feel like is really tied to this conversation? The Las Vegas Raiders.
No doubt.
Right?
Yeah.
Michael Mayer, Brock Bowers, I should have said first. Michael Mayer, you bring in Jack Besh, who's a blocking receiver. Jacoby gets his hands dirty. I think that offense with Chip Kelly, who did all this stuff in college, is going to do everything you just described in terms of creating traffic and conflict over the middle of the field.
Well, I also think too, like a little bit of the bunch is attached to some of the 4x1 stuff that we've talked about as well. Like I can see
the highest rate in years.
Exactly. So you're getting into these formations in so many different ways. You're constantly running the offensive play. Your guys are running somewhat similar stuff or basic stuff. You're just making it look so much differently to the defense. Could you imagine the Raiders getting into some of those 4x1 formations? And now Geno's not going to be a threat to run the football, but you can go into your bunch formation with your 2 tight ends one side, Genty to that formation 4x1, and you could run basic zone concepts and also have pass concepts that, like, Buffalo does a really good job of building their RPO game off of it, and they'll kick the ball out to Kincaid and he'll get 4 yards. Could you imagine doing that with Brock Bowers? So now Geno, that's your triple option. That's the modern day triple option. Again, Geno's not going to kill you running the football, but if Geno's got to carry the ball once or twice in those situations in a game to go get 4 or 5 yards, that's going to be easy for him. So yeah, there's just this evolution of stuff that you're forcing the defense to do a lot. We started this about personnel, but now you're also dictating like leverage and communication and like you're mandating fronts to defenses, and that's a lot for all 11 guys to be on the same page.
Yeah, I always tell people it's base for me. Football is just an offense is just about numbers, size,
math,
and angles, and everything. Yeah, math. And what we're describing is how offenses are so good now at
Mhm.
creating spatial advantages and size advantages and numbers advantages. So now I want to talk a little bit about how, as a defense, you deal with this. Let's talk about specifically condensed formations, because as we described, they're making corners tackle. You're seeing, by the way, certain corners like Frank Sauce Gardner, for example, incredible cover corner, came into the league, lit it on fire. He was so good in man coverage, amazing feet, amazing ball skills. And then offenses were like, cool, we're going to get tight and run.
Here
Yeah.
it comes. Yep.
And he couldn't stop it. And last
Yep.
year, so as a defense, what can you do to deal with all of this?
Yeah, I think like I would say the team that probably does the best job against it is Kansas City and Spags. I think there's a couple reasons. One, Spags is so good at figuring out ways to trigger the edges, and blitz corners and
Blitzing
still play
corners
with
is huge, I
protection. So
think.
you have to, I think, number one, there's a reality of you have to have people that are capable both on the interior and the exterior of being dual threats or diversified football players. I think you have to have really creative fronts. Like you have to, we talked about it last year with Denver. Denver was really capable of handling it because their front is so good. Like Zach Allen is capable of being such a difference maker on the backside of a lot of these formations where you're like,
Yeah.
and then Surtain. So like if you have Surtain and Zach Allen backside there, okay. So I think people, I think fronts, I think stunts, and then your ability to have those corners pressure with the coverage
Yeah.
element backside that doesn't expose you is a big, big, big deal.
Corner blitzes are something. Spags is the
To
king
go
of
up.
the corner, but should go up, right? Because when you get into a condensed formation, that is the vulnerability.
Yeah.
It's a quicker path to the quarterback for the corner.
Totally. Like, so some of the thing teaching wise that goes on in offenses is if you're a receiver, we line up in a formation, you're a condensed split, and that corner lines up like up over your head. And there's a safety that what we call stacks him. So, like, that corner's right over your head, and that safety stacks him. What we would, as an offense, do is immediately that young receiver or receiver in general, his job is to communicate to that quarterback and people like, hey, alert for corner cat, alert for corner cat. So there's an alert for it. So then now I'm like, okay. So then I'm trying to see everything. And does the picture look like there's the potential for it? So then I have to account for it. So then that might change who my tackle's going to in the run game. That might change who my back's responsible for in the pass game when it comes to protection. And it's not like you're going to do it often, but your ability to do it, and then a corner that can set the edge in the run as
Okay.
well,
So, yeah.
is huge. It's huge.
I think it's never been more important to have a nickel who is versatile and violent.
100%.
You look at
100%.
Cooper DeJean, Devin Witherspoon in Seattle, McDuffie when they slide him inside. But I mean, or you like a player like Kyle Hamilton, who's a big nickel. Humphrey, who was unbelievable this year in this exact role,
Yep.
purely because of the way offenses are playing. You have to have a guy who is playing, close to the line of scrimmage, who's a threat to blitz also at times, by the way.
100%.
A lot of those guys are blitzers too. Witherspoon's a great example, but also can get their hands dirty, cannot get pushed around by tight ends. I feel
Totally.
like that's a mandate right now for defenses.
Old school nickel. Like that's like I go back to, some of the best, like Antoine Winfield was ridiculous at it. Like he was, and that's when those teams would knife, what we would call knife stuff, where these corners and nickels would play in between and they would trigger and you would still have people. That's kind of one of the ways that, like, I guess Tampa 2 was built. That nickel he was the run guy and the middle linebacker was the pass responsibility guy. And so, yeah, I think that there's got to be, the commitment of the people capable of handling some of these condensed formations. There's got to be the numbers that you do. We get into coverages where, cover 6 is a coverage that we would call when a team plays like a cover 2, which is that flat corner and deep half safety to one side. And then the front side safety and corner would play like a quarter of the field each. It's a zone defense. Then you can get teams that are getting into these invert coverages where Like if I have a bunch to the field, you don't want to necessarily play a ton of shell to it. I can run the football on you for 4 or 5 yards a clip in that situation. So like you can drop the backside safety down, but he becomes the flat player and the corner becomes the half field player. And so I think you'll see a little bit of growth with teams playing some inverted coverage to get a
Mm.
run support guy down to the football while also not exposing themselves to a non-shell coverage.
The Chiefs do that a bit.
A ton.
And yeah, like a lot of what we're describing, it's not perfect. You do leave yourself
Totally.
vulnerable to downfield passing contact in particular, but because the offenses aren't pushing the ball downfield that much, you kind of just have to change your, defense is always about you're making a compromise in some way. And I think
Totally.
the compromise that they're making has to evolve a little bit to your point. The final thing I wanted to talk to you about trend wise was teams using all four downs. So I want to talk about this in a specific way. This is obviously not new, but it is something the NFL has become a completely different league. True Media has this thing called go for it rate, which is how often do teams go for it, accounting for a situation, because obviously when a team's down by a lot, they're going to go for it, whatever. So
Sure.
in 2015, it was 12.4%. This last year, it was 20%. Anybody who watches football is aware that teams now go for it in, way more, you'd say risky, but the stats would say it isn't risky, but they're going for it on their own side of the field. They're going for it at greater distances. The teams that obviously get the most attention for this are your Detroits, your Philadelphias with the QB, the tush push. But this is a league-wide trend. This is not changing. No matter how much your dad yells at the TV when you're watching, this is the NFL is.
Sure.
So there's two things I want to bring up to you. One, it's been incredibly lucrative for teams. So like actually teams right now are average per team 53.5 points after converting on fourth down per team over the course of a season. That's up from 29 points in 2015. The EPA, which I won't get into, is off the charts now. And here's the thing I wanted to stress to you, and this is what I want to talk about when I talk about all teams using all four downs. I'm not just talking about fourth down. The average conversion distance, 3.7, that is over a yard down from 2015. And it's the lowest it's ever been. So I want to ask you how much you think is that is just teams getting better at running the ball and maybe they're in better situations versus how much is it teams who are like, we know we're going to go for it. Let's change the way we approach third down, because I think this is one of the most slept on trends in the entire NFL.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So I think that the way that it's getting coached is probably very different as well. Like I go back to years ago, but like, you can now tell your quarterback, hey, when it's 2nd and 7, like, and it's not there, we can take a check down and get us to 3rd and 5. And when it's 3rd and 5 and it's not there, you can take a check down and get us to 4th and 2. You never, back in the day, remember people would lose their minds, stop throwing the ball short of the sticks on 3rd down.
Yeah.
And like it would be emphasized to the quarterback, like you don't really want to do that. You want to open up the depth, the deeper option to convert. And now it's like, well, a quarterback is so much more willing to do it, knowing who they are offensively and their ability to do it. So I have a question for you as well. But okay, so I think a lot of this comes down to like, who are you offensively? Like, how good are you at it on 3rd down? How good are you at it on 4th down? Are you a different offense on 4th down? Like, is that it? Are you a quarterback run offense on 4th down? I go back to Washington last year and how ridiculous they were at it, but that was a little bit like because they had Jaden, and Jaden would just make it right. I think a little bit is like, who's your kicker? How good do you feel about the kicker? I think the other thing is how good do you feel about the defense, like your defense? Like if you don't get it, like, are you confident in your defense? What quarterback you're playing against or what offense you're playing against? Because you're trying to not only steal a possession for yourself, you're trying to steal a possession away from them. And so like, I think there's a lot of variables that probably go into it on a week to week basis.
I think one of the most misunderstood things about like analytics and fourth down decision making is, and you hear this on certain broadcasts, not yours, but they'll say, well, the models don't account for who's on the field. Yes, they do. Everything that you're describing, Dan, like is our quarterback a running threat? Is their defense? How good is their defensive line? How good have they been all year? teams know this. Teams are
Yeah.
so far ahead of what sometimes is,
How
I
much
feel
time
like,
is left in the
portrayed.
game?
Yeah.
Like how many possessions
All
are
of this
left? All
is
that. Yeah.
factored in. And the numbers have overwhelmingly said, coaches, you should be doing this more. You should be. And I think in part because how it changes third down. I'm so dialed in on third down. Imagine you're a deep. Okay, so you were talking about how as an offense. This is another thing I think people don't understand, like how much of your game planning is oriented around down and distance and the playbook and all of that. Same thing for defense. So you're a defensive coordinator. It's 3rd and 5. You're facing the Detroit Lions.
Yeah.
In
It's
the
it's
past,
50-50 what you're gonna get.
yeah, because they don't need to convert. I
Yep.
can't stress enough as a defense. Dan,
Yep.
like how much does that make your life hell? Knowing not only do they might run it, they only need 3 yards,
Yeah, and I
and then
would
they're probably gonna
imagine
go for it.
I would be fascinating to hear some of the defenses. So often building game plans, like it's in situational moments, it's grouped together. So like as a defensive
Yes,
coordinator, you're hey, it's 3rd and 8 plus. These are our defensive calls. It's 3rd and 5 to 7. These are our defensive calls. It's 3rd and 4 or less. These are our defensive calls, and it's like, well, are you used to call those to think that you would get off the field if you gave up 3 yards or less on 3rd and 4 or less, or you know what I'm saying, or 3rd and 5 to 7 if you would get off the field. That's not the case anymore. And so like how are they changing their situational play calls? Because part of me goes, it's still a win to get them to 4th down. It is. But then like at some point you want to be the aggressor
yeah.
and get them to 4th and 5, not 4th and 2. Then that leaves yourself more vulnerable for big shots down the field that offenses can then take advantage of as well. So it's like those third downs are brutal on defenses nowadays.
The 3rd and shorts too, where we see teams taking those shots now because they know they're just going to go
I'm
for it
going
if they
for it
don't
on
get
4th
it.
down. And
Completely changes the way you play them.
my question was going to be, do you have through True Media or something the failure rate and what that turns into when it comes to points? Like,
Yeah, I mean, right now, last year, defense is converted at a historic, or offense is converted at a historic rate. A lot of that was skewed by the Washington Commanders, to be
yeah,
honest.
they were like 24-26 or something. It was ridiculous.
But by and large, overwhelmingly, it's worth it. Basically, yes, even the teams that have some pretty high profile failure. I don't know. I think about like the Bills in the
Yeah.
the final game of the season. Every single time they should have gone for it. It's over just because the advantages you gained are so enormous now in terms of going on to score points. The Commander is crazy, but other teams as
I
well.
would be interested to know, do you have the list of like the best teams at it last year in front of you?
Yeah.
Because read them down top to bottom to me, and I just want to know who the quarterbacks are.
Oh gosh, yes, you're wondering if it's rushing quarterbacks. Okay, hold on. I'm going to tell you the ones with the teams that gain, not who converted at the highest rate, but the teams that gained the most points in EPA from doing it is kind of how we think about it. Okay, so this is teams that scored the most points after 4th down conversions.
Okay.
The Commanders, the Lions, the Bills, the Broncos are the top 4.
Really?
The Broncos. Interesting, right? Yeah.
The Broncos
so the teams they're up there too at the converting at the highest rate. The 5 teams that converted at the highest rate: the Commanders, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Eagles, the Broncos. Bo Nix can scramble, man. I think that was really unlocked in the second half of last season. Is him as a scrambling. But yeah, this I know your head's like having a quarterback who's a dual threat. Completely, just you should go for it so much more.
Or like just great. Like a great quarterback, Josh and Patrick are in there. I think part of it is like you're giving an elite part of your team another opportunity. Like when you say Detroit and Philadelphia, I also think you're giving the 2 best offensive lines in the NFL 3 more downs at a minimum,
Yeah. It's that's the thing. So at the beginning of this pod, we talked about how teams now create advantages for themselves through formation, through personnel groupings, all of this. It's like numbers, whatever. This is another way where offenses have a huge advantage. I always think about like when we talk about whether teams should like kick field goals or whatever. something I often think about, and I think this is sometimes not appreciated, is what are you incentivizing the other team to do? So sometimes as a defense, or as an offense, if you go for it and you fail, or let's say you're up by a touchdown, or the other team needs a touchdown to win, you're telling the team you have to use all 4 downs.
Totally.
You're giving them information. I think it's something that's kind of underappreciated sometimes in end of game strategy, but it's the same thing. It's what we're talking about here, which is if you're an offense and we will use all 4 downs, it's such an advantage.
Free.
Not just on 4th down, on 3rd down too. And as a defense, it makes life so much more difficult. I think that's something that's not.
And I think, when you say it in that way, again, my mind throughout this whole conversation is going into like just sitting in these rooms when you're game planning. And I would imagine that is so freeing for play caller and quarterback. Hey, we're going to go for it on 4th down. Like imagine if you're Dan Campbell and you're telling your offense with, back in the day, it was Ben Johnson and Jared Goff, guys, we get past the 40. We're going for it on 4th down. You're so much more free as a 2nd and 3rd down play caller and as a quarterback with what you do in your decision making, because you have another down and your coach has been like, we're good. Like we're good.
It's a gift.
Totally.
But it is something that I remember I had Amon-Ra St. Brown on my pod once, and he was like, we all know that as an offense, that we're not playing on 3rd down sometimes. If I catch the ball and I'm a couple yards short, that's a win for us.
Yeah.
That is radical in terms of how it can change as an offense, how you approach 100%. Things. So I wanted to bring that up because as I saw that number to go coming down and I thought about teams that are playing, I think it's really, really a big change in how teams approach football.
Yeah.
That's it for now. We're out of time. I feel like I could have kept asking you questions forever. But I think all of these things are things we're going to see continuing this season in terms of running the ball, condensed formations, 4x1 motion, bunches. Let's put a pin in that. I want to talk more about that. 12 personnel, and then teams using all 4 downs. I feel like we're going to continue to see a lot of this, and maybe you guys tune into NFL Live. We'll talk about this. I'm sure we'll talk about other things as the season goes along. Dan, thank you so much for joining the show. This was really a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Hopefully it's not 1,000 days till I come back.